Sir, I need to see some ID. We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area.
Sitting on the bench, reading a book. What's suspicious about that?
Do you have identification or not?
I'm a psychiatrist at the hospital across the street. I eat lunch here every single day.
I don't care if you're the president. ID, now.
Is it because I'm black?
The body camera captured everything. What began as a peaceful lunch break in Riverside Park would become a defining moment in police accountability. A confrontation between a decorated forensic psychiatrist and an officer who had no idea whom he was challenging. Dr. Malcolm Pierce, 52, was enjoying his customary lunch routine on a Wednesday afternoon in September. For 8 years, he'd occupied the same bench in Riverside Park, spending his break reading medical journals while eating a simple turkey sandwich. The routine was his respite from the demanding work of evaluating police officers for psychological fitness. Pierce wasn't just any psychiatrist. Over 23 years in forensic psychiatry, he had assessed more than 2,000 law enforcement officers across 3 city police departments. His specialty was identifying personality disorders, rage issues, racial bias, and authority complexes, usually within the first 20 minutes of an interview. His reports were thorough, evidence-based, and frequently unwelcome. Pierce didn't rubber stamp evaluations. When officers showed psychological unfitness, he documented it exhaustively and recommended against their hiring or reinstatement. The park was picturesque that day. Autumn colors were emerging on the trees. Families fed ducks by the pond. Joggers followed the paths. Pierce sat in khakis and a button-down shirt, his hospital ID clipped to his belt, doing nothing remotely suspicious. Officer Nolan Prescott, 29, had been with the Metropolitan Police Department for 5 years. His record appeared clean, decent arrest numbers, no shootings, only 2 citizen complaints for rudeness that had been quickly dismissed. What his file didn't reveal was the pattern. A tendency to stop and question black men in this particular park. Traffic stops heavily skewed toward minority drivers, and reports that consistently emphasized furtive movements and suspicious behavior when describing people of color. Walking his patrol route through the park, Prescott spotted Pierce and approached him. He would later claim he was responding to reports of suspicious activity. Dispatch logs would prove no such reports existed. The interaction began with a demand for identification. Pierce questioned why. The exchange escalated from there. Prescott's tone carried assumed authority, not a request, but a command. Pierce, recognizing the body language and overcompensating aggression he'd seen hundreds of times in evaluation sessions, calmly explained he was simply having lunch. "Just comply with my request," Prescott insisted. "Do you have identification or not?" Pierce identified himself as a psychiatrist from the hospital across the street, explaining his 8-year lunch routine. A reasonable officer would have walked away. Prescott wasn't being reasonable. "That doesn't answer my question. ID. Now." Pierce could have ended the encounter immediately by showing identification. It was in his wallet, hospital credentials, driver's license, even his consultant badge for the police department's psychological services division. But Pierce had learned something critical over 2 decades of evaluating officers. Complying with unlawful orders validates them, teaching officers they can demand compliance without cause. Instead, he asked, "Officer, under what legal authority are you demanding my identification?" Prescott's jaw tightened. "I don't have to explain myself to you. This is a lawful order. Failure to comply is obstruction." Pierce responded calmly. "Under Hybel versus Nevada, you need reasonable suspicion of criminal activity to require identification. I'm sitting on a public bench during daylight hours. What specific, articulable facts give you reasonable suspicion that I'm engaged in criminal activity?" Prescott hadn't expected legal citations. He changed tactics, claiming there had been theft reports in the area. Pierce pressed for details. "What was stolen? When? What's the report number?" Silence. There was no report. Prescott was improvising. After more back and forth, Prescott tried a softer approach, suggesting Pierce just show ID so he could return to his lunch. "This park, we get a lot of problems. I'm sure you understand." Pierce recognized the coded language immediately, language he'd seen countless times in evaluation sessions where officers danced around explicit racism while soaking in implicit bias. "Officer, I'm going to explain something to you, Pierce said. You approached me without probable cause. You demanded identification without reasonable suspicion. You've now claimed there are theft reports that I'm certain don't exist. You're violating my Fourth Amendment rights, and you're doing it because you made assumptions about me based on how I look. Prescott's face flushed. He started to deny it, but couldn't complete the sentence without revealing his bias. What's your badge number? Pierce asked. You don't need my badge number. You're not being detained. Am I free to go? The question forced Prescott into an impossible position. Saying yes meant losing face. Saying no required articulating legal grounds for detention he didn't have. I'm asking you to voluntarily provide identification, Prescott finally managed. And I'm declining your request. Am I free to go, or am I being detained? Sir, you're being difficult. No, officer. I'm asserting my constitutional rights. There's a difference. Now, am I free to go? Prescott's hand moved toward his radio to call for backup. Pierce understood what was happening and played his trump card. Before you call for backup, you should know that I'm Dr. Malcolm Pierce. I'm the forensic psychiatrist who conducts psychological evaluations for the Metropolitan Police Department. I evaluate officers for fitness for duty. I've personally evaluated probably 100 officers from your precinct, and everything that's happening right now is going into a report that your superiors are going to see. Prescott froze. His face cycled through confusion, recognition, fear, anger, and denial. I don't believe you. Pierce slowly extracted a business card from his wallet. Dr. Malcolm Pierce, MD, PhD, Forensic Psychiatry, Police Psychological Services Consultant, Metropolitan Police Department. Prescott stared at the card, calculating how much trouble he was in. You can call the department's Psychological Services office. Ask for me. They'll confirm. Or you can check your own precinct's files. I evaluated 3 candidates from your station in the last 6 months alone. Failed all 3 for psychological unfitness. By now, other park visitors had noticed a woman with a stroller, 2 teenagers on bikes, an older man with his dog. Prescott was aware of his audience and aware that everything he'd said and done would end up in a file somewhere. I was just doing my job, Prescott said quietly. No, Pierce corrected him. You were violating my rights because you made assumptions about who belongs in this park. That's not your job. That's bias. And it's exactly the kind of behavior that should disqualify someone from law enforcement. Pierce stood, gathered his belongings, and demanded Prescott's badge number, name, and station. I'm filing a formal complaint, and I'm documenting this encounter in my professional capacity as a police psychologist. You violated my rights. You demonstrated clear signs of implicit bias, and you attempted to use your authority to cover for the fact that you had no legal basis for this stop. Badge 5439. Officer Nolan Prescott, 12th Precinct. The encounter had lasted 8 minutes. 8 minutes that would end Nolan Prescott's law enforcement career. Pierce didn't wait to file his complaint. From another bench, he called Internal Affairs directly, providing date, time, location, badge number, specific actions, constitutional violations, and witness information all in the clear. Professional language that made dismissal impossible. The Internal Affairs detective who took the call knew Pierce. When Pierce explained what happened and recommended a full psychological evaluation, the detective responded immediately. I'll initiate the investigation. The investigation began that afternoon. Body camera footage captured the entire encounter in perfect detail. But what investigators found next was even more damning. Prescott's stop data revealed a stark pattern. In 5 years, he'd made 1,247 stops. Of those, 892, 71.5%, were of people of color, nearly double the city's demographic breakdown of 42% people of color. Even more revealing, only 22% of his stops of people of color resulted in arrests or citations, compared to 75% of his stops of white citizens. The pattern was textbook profiling. Stop minorities frequently without finding anything. Stop white citizens less frequently, and usually with actual cause. In his internal affairs interview, Prescott was asked to explain why he'd approached Pierce. He looked out of place. Out of place? How? I don't know. Just didn't seem like he belonged there. In a public park? It's a nice area. We don't usually see. There's usually. Prescott couldn't finish the sentence without explicitly revealing his bias. The interview transcript showed 17 separate instances where he started sentences he couldn't complete, each one a moment where he nearly admitted racial bias before catching himself. When shown the stop data, Prescott tried to explain the disparities by talking about high crime areas, suspicious behavior patterns, and his training. None of it explained why he stopped people of color at double the rate and found violations at a quarter of the rate. On day 12, Pierce submitted his professional evaluation, a 16-page document detailing the psychological indicators Prescott had displayed: authoritarian personality traits, inability to acknowledge mistakes, defensive reactions to legitimate questions, implicit bias manifesting in decision-making, poor judgment, excessive concern with maintaining dominance, lack of self-awareness regarding prejudices. The conclusion: Officer Nolan Prescott was psychologically unfit for duty and should not be carrying a badge or weapon. The Metropolitan Police Department reviewed everything: body camera footage, stop data, internal affairs report, Pierce's evaluation, the pattern of previously dismissed complaints. For once, they chose accountability. Officer Nolan Prescott was terminated on day 28 of the investigation, citing multiple policy violations, pattern of discriminatory behavior, violation of constitutional rights, and psychological unfitness for duty. Prescott appealed. His union fought hard, arguing he deserved another chance. The appeals board asked one question: if we reinstate this officer and he violates someone's rights again, are you prepared for the department to be sued for millions because we ignored clear evidence of a pattern? The union representative couldn't answer. The termination was upheld. Pierce wasn't finished. He filed a complaint with the city's Civilian Complaint Review Board about the 12th Precinct's systemic failure to identify and address Prescott's pattern, the superficial investigations of previous complaints, and the lack of oversight that had let his bias go unchecked for 5 years. The review board investigated every officer in the precinct. What they found was disturbing. Prescott wasn't an outlier. He was the norm. The entire precinct showed statistical evidence of biased policing. The review board issued a scathing report calling for the precinct commander's replacement, new training protocols, independent monitoring of all stops, mandatory data collection, and quarterly reporting. Despite union resistance, the city council, facing pressure from civil rights organizations and the threat of federal intervention, implemented the reforms. Over 6 months, some officers resigned rather than work under new scrutiny. Others adjusted their behavior. Some continued as before and faced discipline for the first time in their careers. Pierce continued his work, using the encounter as a case study in training presentations about implicit bias and officer psychology. He kept eating lunch at the same bench, but now officers nodded politely and kept walking. Word had gotten around. 6 months after the termination, Pierce filed a federal civil rights complaint alleging Fourth Amendment violations, racial profiling, failure to train and supervise, and creation of a culture tolerating discriminatory policing. The city's lawyers reviewed the evidence: Prescott's termination, the review board's findings, the statistical data, Pierce's credentials. They settled quickly for $680,000 and agreement to implement additional reforms. Pierce kept the money. I was violated. My rights were trampled because of the color of my skin. That has value. The city needs to feel the financial consequences of allowing officers like Prescott to operate. If I refuse the money, I'm telling them violations are free. He used part of the settlement for his niece's college fund, part for a coastal property down payment, and the rest for retirement savings. Prescott never worked in law enforcement again. The termination for cause and psychological unfitness determination made him unhireable at other departments. He tried private security, but left that field entirely after continuing bias issues. In later interviews, he claimed he'd been railroaded, never acknowledging his pattern or taking responsibility. The 12th Precinct underwent significant transformation with new leadership, training, and accountability measures. Stop data over the next 2 years showed improvement. Other city precincts implemented similar reforms, some voluntarily, others after their own investigations. The body camera footage, though not released publicly per the settlement agreement, was used extensively in police training nationwide. It became a textbook example in law enforcement psychology programs of how bias manifests in policing and why psychological screening is critical. Pierce occasionally gave talks at police academies and universities, always emphasizing the same message. This wasn't about one bad officer, but about systems that allowed bad officers to operate unchecked, departments that dismissed complaints without real investigation, and cultures that valued loyalty over accountability. He always ended with this: rights only matter if people are willing to assert them, even when it's uncomfortable, even when there's a badge involved, even when compliance would be easier. The park bench remains, occupied daily by people unaware of its significance, as the site of an encounter that changed department policy, ended a career, and became a case study in police reform. Pierce still eats lunch there sometimes, thinking about that September afternoon and the 8 minutes that proved knowledge and professional credentials could force accountability. But he also thinks about all the people who get stopped without cause and don't have his advantages, his credentials, his knowledge of the law, his professional standing to make complaints stick. That's why he did what he did, not just for himself, but for all the others who couldn't fight back as effectively, to create a precedent, to force change, to show that accountability was possible if enough pressure was applied. One man, one park bench, one 8-minute encounter, one career ended, one department reformed. That's the power of refusing to accept the unacceptable.